I would, hello. I would be very. I would be very happy if we could start in 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Allô, allô? Non. Ah. Allô, allô?
Oh, that's here. Right here.
Yeah.
Test, Amsal 2, Test. Kannst du ein bisschen mehr als mal von Schütt? Erst mal Jimmy. Bisschen mehr, nach. 1, 2, ja, okay, das ist okay.
Dear colleagues, if we could start. If you please could seat. I feel that il manque une cloche.
Avant d'être mis en gang, aus meinem Tour de table, mir hai Reihenfolge von den Orateuren. Okay.
Voilà, chers amis, d'abord le.
Dear friends, first of all, it is a real pleasure to host you here in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg on the occasion of the 134th session of the Committee of Ministers, which actually brings to an end our presidency. Thanks to all of you who attended the dinner yesterday evening. We were also able to visit the Grand Duchy's historic industrial heritage as well, and I also thank you for the very fruitful discussions we had. We're up here on the Kirchberg, just by way of a brief introduction. This is the European plateau, Kirchberg, and just a few yards away from here, you've got the European Parliament, so been directly elected since 1979, and then you've also got the house in which Robert Schuman was born, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, a French foreign minister. Many people do not know that he was actually born here in Luxembourg, just a stone's throw away from this building. We've also got the Court of Justice, we've got the Court of Auditors, a European Investment Bank, as well as the Secretariat offices of the European Commission. So we've got many officers here. Those of you who are not members of the European Council, it's held here in Luxembourg twice a year, and this is where we hold those meetings of the Council of the European Union. So I'm delighted to be presiding over the first part of the meeting this morning before I hand over to my counterpart from Malta, who will be taking over. I know Ian very well indeed, and at our most recent meetings we were in Malta recently, and from that, as well as other occasions, I know that you are well equipped to deal with the most thorny of problems and situations and get us all to sit around the table. So I have every confidence in entrusting this task to Ian. Now, there will also be people following us on the site. Delighted that people have time to do so and who are patient enough to follow proceedings here this morning. Just by way of an introduction, what I would say to you, and by the way, let me thank the Secretariat first of all, and all those of you who have thanked me for the terrific evening yesterday evening. We've got the head of protocol, Olivia, who is standing over there at the back. I'd like to thank you and your team because I'm very proud of everything that you have done. Now, we have our ambassador here on my right-hand side, who over the last 6 months has run things at the level of the Committee of Ministers, the Parliamentary Assembly, and for people who didn't understand what I had said, you had my ambassador on hand to explain what I had actually meant. Of course, even though we've been doing this for 6 months, there's still a great deal to learn. Now, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of the war. And since 1957, I mean, let me be quite frank about this. If back in the day, in 1957, we had asked the people of Luxembourg and, say, Italy and all those countries whether they wished to join together in a political project, I dare say they would have said no. But fortunately, politicians decided otherwise, and they decided that they needed to work together to try and support their values, to have a shared economic space as well as a common currency. I mean, I could list many more achievements, but the real point of all of this is that since 1957, our continent has enjoyed peace. Now, we have certain flashpoints, tense situations, we have to negotiate bilaterally, and we have seen the outbreak of war. But we have different perspectives, we're from different backgrounds, we speak different languages, different cultures, different faith communities. Nevertheless, we can sit down around a single table and try to thrash out shared solutions. That is what Europe is all about. Now, there are 46 of us around this table, so many more than at European Union level. And I am delighted that we have a number of ministers around this table, including ministers from the EU. And we have tense relations with some countries. And the most serious state of affairs from my perspective, and I said this last time round, and I'm not naming and shaming, and I'm not getting into any kind of a blame game. However, if we do not manage to preserve peace around this table, then we are not putting our lives on the line, but it is our fellow citizens who will pay with their lives, young people, children. I think we've got to be direct. We've got to be frank about that. We have meetings of ministers, we have platforms, we talk to one another to try to arrive at solutions. I'm very grateful for the discussions we had yesterday evening. Our French minister, I think, gave us an accurate rundown. Now, we're not here to lecture people. That would be the very worst thing we could do. Rather, we are here to talk to one another and to find out where we go from here. And that is the kind of counsel that I will defend. You will be aware of the fact that I have Russian and Polish ancestry. We have one grandmother who was Jewish, another who was Orthodox, another who was Catholic, and yet another who was an atheist. And my Moldovan colleague always pulls me up on this. I forget my Moldovan origins, but I forget which generation was from Moldova. But, you know, my Moldovan colleague says, well, you talk about all of your different heritage, but you forget to mention the Moldovan side of your life. I'm actually married to a Belgian, and, you know, that's a big part of my life as well. The point I'm trying to make is that diversity constitutes the wealth of our continent. I mean, as different as we all are, whether we are a man or a woman, whether we're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whether we're straight, whether we're gay, whether we're from the left or from the right, all we want is to be able to live our lives, to grow up and to have equal opportunities for success. And I'm sorry to have to point this out, but yesterday we signed a convention for the protection of the profession of lawyer. I mean, that is a very sad state of affairs, that we actually have to sign a convention to do something that ought to be self-evident, ought to be plain to each and every one of us. But let's never forget that democracy, the rule of law and respect are like a small shoot. It's like a plant that you have to nurture, that you have to care for. So let's not change. Let's not be subject to pressure to change from the outside. And I'm sorry to have to make this kind of statement, but looking around me and what's going on in the world right why, I mean, I've seen it for myself. I was in Ukraine over the last couple of weeks. Luxembourg also suffered in the past from an aggressive neighbor, and we have been able over time to find a diplomatic solution and to actually build and create something together. So Ukraine, absolutely, sovereignty, territorial integrity. Should we allow another country to decide what is best for it? And I was in Kiev 2 weeks ago, as I said, and the reason I was there, I mean, I said this at the time, you know, and I made no bones about the fact, I made no secret of the fact. I mean, when I went to Moscow, of course, Russia helped us to throw off the Nazi yoke and, of course, paid a very heavy price. But at the same time, we cannot run the risk of having a situation in which Russian tanks and drones bombard Ukraine today, and who knows, the Baltic states and Poland at some point in the future. And that is why it is so important that we have a special tribunal for Ukraine, and will be up to judges to decide who is responsible. We cannot countenance impunity in this situation. Now, when you go to Kiev, you walk alongside a wall, I mean, names of millions of young men. Same is true in Moscow. Most of them younger than me, much younger than me. And that is why I always say it is so important to preserve multilateralism and international equity on our agenda. And that is why the Democratic Pact is so important. Some people might say, it is superfluous, but absolutely not. We need to remind people of our rules, and so that is why I want the Committee of Ministers to press ahead. I mean, I know that it doesn't have any kind of a magic wand. It can't conjure up a solution overnight, but all I would say to you is that I have really endeavoured over the last 6 months to bring people together to try and institute a climate of dialogue. I'm from a small country, I grant you that, but I don't think that size is an obstacle here, and it is not by strength or power that you achieve anything, rather than by engaging in dialogue with others. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of your teams for all of their hard work as well. And something else that I said earlier on about my own background, my CV, as I say, you know, my origins, you know, replicated for millions of other people across our continent. And something that I set great store by is combating intolerance, because diversity is the wealth of this continent. But there are, I'm sorry to say, certain siren voices who wish to try and curtail this diversity, which I view as something which enriches our continent. Now, I don't impose that on anyone. I don't impose my opinion on you, but you have to respect mine. Thank you very much.
Voilà, après cette petite note.
Well, some personal remarks, not on the agenda. I do apologize, Ambassador. I know that you had planned something quite different. I will give the floor now to our Secretary General Alain Berset, and thank you for your very comprehensive report, also very enlightening towards a new democratic pact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman of the Committee of Ministers, dear Xavier. Thank you ever so much for this introduction, which was a very personal one, but also a very strong one, and it really speaks volumes about the values and what bring us together as Europeans. Thank you very much indeed for the organisation of this ministerial. Thank you also for the 6 months of the Luxembourg presidency, which have been excellent. They've taken place in a very difficult context, as we all know, and I'm delighted to continue the work with Malta, which will be taking on over the reins. Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, for the past few months, events have been unfolding at a dizzying speed. In Kiev, 4 major European capitals from the coalition of the willing called for a 30-day ceasefire this weekend. A meeting between President Zelensky and Putin appears to be an envisageable scenario. In Romania, a candidate whose favourite for the presidential election is mentioning the annexation of neighbouring territories. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, a crisis in the judiciary is causing upheavals in the country and is threatening the stability of the Balkans. Yet at the same time, in Geneva, China and the United States have made a headway with a view to avoiding an economic world war. In Kashmir, 2 nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, are trying somewhat to respect a fragile ceasefire. And everywhere, new technologies are moving much faster than rules. Climate, which has already been mentioned, which seems to have disappeared from debate, is continuing to wreak havoc. More things have occurred in the last 6 months, and perhaps over the past days, than occurred over the past 6 years. So what can we do faced with this situation? How can we ensure that we maintain our course in a world in which the old order seems to be waning, but the new order is not yet there? In other words, do we have the ability to act in this disorder? I think the answer to this is very clear. It's a resounding yes. We do have the ability to act in this disorder because it's in difficult times such as the ones we're experiencing now that the Council of Europe was created. The Council of Europe was not created for easy times, easy periods. It was created in the ruins of the Second World War, at a time when the ambition was to ensure that together we would never again have to experience this. So the answer is yes. Let me use the most sort of striking example we have. Let's look at what's happening in Ukraine. Every day we can see this, that the peace in Europe belongs to Europeans, and peace can be constructed based on concrete actions. Now, we have 3 pillars at the Council of Europe. First of all, we have the European Court of Human Rights. I'm delighted that we have with us the President-elect of the European Court of Human Rights, the current President of the European Court of Human Rights, who with us here today at the Ministerial. There are thousands of cases of violations of human rights which are dealt with by the European Court of Human Rights, even when there is a war. We continue to deal with this. Now, the second key pillar is the damage registry. I think you know about this, of course. It was a historic event which dates back to the Reykjavik summit in 2023 when it was created. This registry is fully operational. And there are new categories of damage that are being dealt with. We have more than 23,000 cases that have been recorded by the damage register, and we're making quite significant headway. The third key point, which the chair of the Committee of Ministers mentioned just now, is the creation of a special tribunal. Political support for this was expressed in Lviv last week. The states need to follow up on this political will. Funding should also be provided for this as well, because it's the only way of combating impunity. It's the only way of ensuring that the destruction, violence and force will not win, but that responsibility, accountability, reparations, redress and the rule of law will prevail. I'd like now to remind you a quote from Churchill. Churchill made a key speech in Zurich in 1946. He's one of the founding fathers of the Council of Europe. And what did he tell us? What was his message in 1946? I quote. He said something about the past and said, "The League of Nations did not fail because of its principles. The League of Nations fell because those principles were deserted by those states which brought it into being, because the governments of those states feared to face the facts and act while time remained." Just imagine this. This was said by Churchill in September 1946 in Zurich. Well, it's just as valid today. The Council of Europe does not command armies, but it does have another strength, different strength. That is history and the force from values to ensure that the crime of aggression does not pay is not to lead to impunity, that the law prevails, that accountability can contribute to peace. And it's not just the borders of Europe that are threatened, it's the values that are being threatened. The rule of law is being threatened in several different places in the European continent. And this fragmentation of our continent is reminding us that there is a vulnerability in the entire European security architecture. The annual report that has been published sounds the alarm on this. There are increasingly laws against foreign interference, and they're reducing civic space. There's disinformation which is distorting campaigns. There's an excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. We're witnessing anti-migrant, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim speeches and anti-law speeches. Journalists are under threat. The young people are less and less committed or involved. Half of young people, approximately, are wondering just whether democracy is the best system to have to improve their prospects for future generations. There's political interference with the nomination of judges, and cybercrime is booming. All this leads us to a conclusion which is not a positive one. And faced with this, we need to rethink European security. European security cannot be devised in silos. The division between what we call hard security and prevention or soft security is a division that is, I think, a thing of the past. We now need to think in terms of democratic security to face a situation in which there's a total lack of security. We need to protect our institutions, our rules and our freedoms. We need to do this faced with external threats and internal threats, and this is our main line of defence. The Council of Europe has a key role to play here. This is the role of the Democratic Pact. Thank you very much to Xavier for mentioning this. It may sound all a bit strange. What does he mean by a democratic pact? Hasn't everything been said about democracy that needs to be said? Well, no. The backdrop, the conditions are completely changed. And we're not going to go backwards, of course. We want to go back. Who, apart from the Council of Europe, can do this? What is our role? Our role is to think together about how we can revitalise democracy against a backdrop which is completely changed, to develop a joint solution. And what we need to develop should be there for the long term. In 1949, I was talking about the creation of the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe was born based on a promise, and the promise was never again. In 2025, the threat is no longer a military one. It's our institutions, our freedoms, and our values which have become targets. Because what we're experiencing is not just an additional crisis as such. It's a crisis concerning the order itself. It's not simply another crisis which adds to the other crises that we've experienced. It's a general crisis concerning order, and we need to respond to this. This is why we need a new democratic pact for Europe, a pact which protects not only against wars, but also against this slow erosion, this sort of pernicious erosion, this silent erosion, this daily erosion of what we are. This ministerial meeting is taking place at the right time, and I'm delighted looking around the table, and I feel very moved because I think we're all here together. That's 46 countries representing a huge continent. We all need to respect diversity. We respect differences, but we're united around our values with a collective identity and shared ambition. Let's ensure that this shared ambition can become a reality. We really have a huge responsibility here together within the Council of Europe. And this ministerial is the right time, I think, for us to make concrete headway, for us to speed things up, but to change not a paradigm, but to change the speed in which we're moving. We need to face up to the changing times. We're not doing it for us, we're doing it for our populations. We want the future generations to have prospects. We want them to have the same prospects. And perhaps we can hope that it will be as easy as it was for us in the past, and let's not leave our continent on its own. Let's ensure that we increase prospects for the future generations. Thank you very much indeed.
Voilà, messieurs, mesdames.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask Ms. Irina Mudra, Mr. Karadzievich, representing Ukraine, to hand over a letter to the Secretary General and myself, calling on the Council of Europe to set up the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine.
Dear Secretary General, distinguished ministers, Your Excellencies, it's an honor to address you today on behalf of Ukraine. Last Friday, in Lviv, the city where the spirit of international law was born, we had a historic moment of showing to the whole world the unity, the global unity, the support of the creation of the international mechanism for prosecuting the crime of aggression, special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. That moment was not only symbolic, it was a turning point in the global effort to restore justice and lead a future war of conquest. As my president, Volodymyr Zelensky, said, by creating the special tribunal, we are not only restoring justice, we are defending it. And when this tribunal is established, it will mean that international law has not lost its power. On the contrary, it will be the response of international law to the greatest threat to peace since the World War II, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Today, with deep gratitude and full resolve, we are formally transmitting the letter from Ukraine and draft documents necessary to launch this tribunal. This is more than a legal step. It is a moral commitment to accountability, to peace through justice, to the rule of law. It's symbolic that this ceremony takes place in the same building, in the same room, where in January 2024, Luxembourg hosted a meeting of the co-group. That meeting laid the groundwork for today's step forward. We greatly appreciate the support of Luxembourg in our fight for justice. We are confident that the Council of Europe, as the guardian of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law on our continent, will continue to stand with Ukraine. We deeply trust in your leadership and in your partnership. The President of Ukraine, our government, and people remain unwavering in dedication to the tribunal. We will work tirelessly until the architects of aggressors are brought to justice and the foundations of long and lasting peace are secured. Thank you.
So thank you very much for this presence today and this moment together. I want to thank Ukraine State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Karasevich. Thank you very much for being here with us to deliver this letter. I mean, this document that we just received today has been a long time in the making. The credit goes to the core group, which in fact represents a broad international coalition of countries in Europe and beyond. And member states have chosen to establish a special tribunal within the framework of the Council of Europe. And receiving these documents here during the annual session of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe is meaningful. Now it is up to all of us, also to the Committee of Ministers, to follow through on the political will expressed, and funding for the tribunal must also be secured. These are two major steps before us. Just want also to quote, if I may, President Zelensky, and he said last week in Lviv, there is a lot of work ahead, but we have already chosen our path. And thank you for this path common with us, that path. And let me say it clearly, it's the path of justice. Justice must prevail. It is the path of reconstruction. And above all, it is about the future of Ukraine and Europe for a peace that is just and lasting across our entire continent. So thank you very much for giving us this letter. It is a huge responsibility for us, and you can count on us.
Approve it.